In the name of the one who creates, redeems, and sustains us. Amen. Oftentimes, the stories we hear in the scriptures, particularly the Gospels, are litmus tests for us. Sort of the way in a choir, the leader will play a note to sort of tune the singer's ears to see if they're a little bit off. The story we hear today functions as that true note for us to tune our ears as we think about deserving, or as we think about entitlement. We base a lot of our moral assessments and even a lot of our personal interactions on who deserves what, about what needs to be earned and what is deserved. And this harkens back to what's called the just world hypothesis, which is the idea that people need to believe that one will get what one deserves so strongly that they will rationalize an inexplicable injustice by naming things the victim might have done to deserve it. We're hearing echoes of that in the national conversation about family separation, who shouldn't have done what, but it's not unfamiliar. Here in Seattle, we hear abundant justifications for locking children in cages. As long as we call it juvie and we say that it's legal, many of us are fine with the caged children in our town because they deserve it. Our primary conversation has been about designing them nicer, prettier cages. Colloquially, we hear entitlement used derogatorily to describe social programs that keep people alive when they're hurting: Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, unemployment, and welfare. And we call wanting to be alive entitlement. I find it interesting that we rarely use the word entitlement to describe the behavior of powerful people, even when they meet the textbook definition. Many of us have had a boss who we discovered early on expected us to, make and bring him coffee, even though that was not why we went to graduate school. I suppose sometimes we name that entitlement, but more often I hear that described as, oh, he's just like that. You'll get used to it. In today's gospel story, we hear a story of a woman who felt entitled to Jesus' healing. She had a flow of blood that rendered her ritually unclean, according to Levitical law. Although whether or not this would have impacted her life much in her small town rather than in the city, where all the rules about engaging the temple would have been involved, is unclear. It would have likely meant a life scarce on touch. Touch is a pretty critical human need, and living without it is extremely lonely. We see this now sometimes among people whose spouses have died. And the shock of touch deprivation is very hard to bear, but something we don't talk about very much. And sandwiching her story is one where a prominent man does not demonstrate entitlement to his daughter's healing. And this description of him, which is translated leader in the synagogue, probably means something closer to respected citizen rather than a religious officer. But this man with a great deal of social power, of respectability, demonstrates the opposite of entitlement. He throws himself on the ground at Jesus' feet and begs, humiliatingly, for his daughter's life. He is not certain of the outcome. The scholar Bruce Molina writes, falling at the feet of someone is a gesture acknowledging social inferiority. Moreover, the gesture happens in front of a large crowd that can be expected to spread the news of what has occurred. And healing by touch is a typical gesture of traditional healers rather than professional physicians, the people to whom he would be expected to go. Can you imagine, in our time and place, one of the tech giants of Seattle pounding the streets until he finds an RV packed on a residential street, crammed with clothes and food and photographs, and asking the woman living inside to come heal his little daughter who has a fast-growing cancer? Perhaps he heard through the grapevine that she had special powers, that she was a herbalist and a traditional healer. Can you picture that? It's a rough equivalent of what's happening in this story. The woman with the hemorrhage did not gently accept her fate. We're told that she fought for years for her own healing. She spent all her money on physicians, and she believed that she was worth healing. She believed that her body was worth saving. Her behavior was not civil. It was not correct. She committed a major social violation to get what she wanted. And even today, we find that unseemly in women. And even today, when I visit people who are ill, I often encounter uncertainty about whether or not they experience themselves being worth being well. Therapists, too, report an immense amount of internal conflict about whether or not the pain we're in is our own fault or not. For this woman to be crystal clear and to remain crystal clear for 12 years that she deserved to be well, that in itself is a miracle. And how did Jesus respond to her? Did he tell her that if she had asked politely, he would have given her what she wanted? No. He congratulated her and acknowledged her uppity behavior as earning her the title daughter. This kind of swagger gets you into the family of God, apparently. And raising a ruckus is something that God recognizes, like recognizing like. And Jesus also honors the man. This man who we would expect to feel entitled to excellent treatment within his community, who refused his entitlement and who publicly humiliated himself on behalf of his small daughter. And this is unusual. We're told that about half of all children at that time didn't make it to adulthood. So it seems likely that he should have been expecting that she also wouldn't make it. It wasn't the smartest idea of him to invest in his little daughter. Sort of useless of him to love her so much, to care about her. And yet he did. And he was willing to endure shame for loving her. These two stories are a small, brief portrait of the empire of heaven, the reign of God, where the rules of this world are distorted and reversed, stretched and broken. A dirty and disreputable woman believes in her right to God and wellness, to being a full and complete member of the community, to a life free from pain. An important man voluntarily offers himself as an inferior to a poor man to save a little girl. The most powerful person in the story, God, behaves the most erratically of all. He refused to believe the "we're just concerned" crowd who tell him the little girl is dead. Maybe to make sure that this rabble-rouser doesn't make an appearance at their leader's house. He continues to act and to move toward the little girl, even though they are literally laughing at him in a house full of sickness and death. He enters the room, touches the little girl gently and appropriately on her hand, and helps her up. When the bystanders stand around gawking, he tells them to move their behinds and get her something to eat, and to tell no one. This is our tuning fork. This is our true note. This is what heaven looks like: an uppity woman rewarded, a respectable man willing to humble himself, a powerful man who doesn't want fame or congratulations. This is a way for us to train our vision, to train our imaginations, and to train our moral compass. It's hard to imagine, given what our world looks like right now. But when God moves through the world, this is what it looks like. And this is one way for us to keep our eyes on hope, to be able to look for signs of wellness and healing. This is one way for us to keep our consciences sharp, to be able to discern differences between what is happening now and what happens when God is moving through the creation. In the Black church, in the preaching tradition, one of the things I love is one of the responses the congregation will call out to the preacher is, "Make it plain." Because that's what these stories do for us. They make the kingdom of God plain. And may we leave our encounter with them better able to assess the world, better able to make choices that are consistent with God's favor, better able to insist when we need to insist, humble ourselves when we need to humble ourselves, and ensure every little child stays alive, surrounded by their family with a full belly.